Alright, Helena, it's time to review your sister St. Louis. Now, considering how the community considers her in another ship, I'm probably going to have to do something first. I might have to censor this a little bit like this, just so that people's minds are off of that. Let me go ahead and add this as well instead. Perfect, there we go. Well, okay, look, I have to do this since we still have a few members sacrificing everything for No Nut Nova. Wait a minute, it's just December. It's December. We don't need this anymore. The challenge, it's over. It's...
終わりだ!
Enterprise, you did this in your video. This is not your video. Get out of here. Well, anyway, I guess we can get rid of this then, and... can you stop looking at me like that? Seriously, stop looking at me like that. You know what? No. Alright, you know what? You go to 10-2, you find Honolulu, and you guys go do whatever you guys normally do on a... whatever. I'm gonna stay over here and give this cinnamon roll of mine head pats.
殿様、山城にはどんなことでも甘えていいんですよ。
Alright, it's time for the one and only USS St. St. Louis. Now, St. Louis is one of many light cruisers hailing from the Eagle Union and is the sister ship to Helena and a few others of the Brooklyn class. Now, St. Louis has two ways of being obtained. If you're willing to spend the time to grind, you could obtain her at 10-3. Do note that this might take some time as elite drops may be rather difficult to obtain. I'm staring at you, Nicholas. However, she's also one of the many ships that can be built. Unfortunately, this is the light build pool you'll have to work with, so good luck, and I'm sure Sandy will be there to say hello to you. Now, we've already covered Helena and Cleveland, who are two other light cruisers from the Eagle Union. So the real question is, how does she fare against them? How is she against the other remaining elite light cruisers? Is she a ship worth using in combat? Or is her best talents related to, research purposes? Well, let's see how she fares stat-wise. Something that is worth noting right off the bat is that St. Louis's stats are almost completely identical to Helena. Starting off with her offense stats, St. Louis has the highest firepower out of most of the elite light cruisers. For what I can see, only retrofitted ships seem to beat her in firepower, but that makes sense to me. Nonetheless, this will help her definitely dish out some decent damage with her guns. Now, being a gunboat, St. Louis does not have any torpedoes to attack with, but gains an additional gun mount when limit breaking her for the second time. This will allow her to fire her main gun twice. And now in terms of her reload, she sits at about an average reload for that stat. This can help her maintain a decent DPS against other ships. Now in all honesty, her starting offense stats are pretty good so far for a light cruiser, so she's got a good offense game at the least. In terms of her survival, St. Louis has the same health amount as Helena does, which is relatively lower than most of her Eagle counterparts. Her light armor doesn't allow for a lot of resistances against HE guns, but do well against torpedoes and most AP guns. Just be careful if up against enemies with HE guns. She might end up taking more damage than you want her to. Now, her evasion is lower than average, but the difference is not that much, so most light cruisers are still about as likely to get hit by attacks as she is. Lastly, her anti-air stat is relatively low compared to her Eagle counterparts. However, because she is an Eagle, her anti-air stat is about average against all factions. She'll take more damage from aircraft compared to other Eagle ships, but will fare better than most Sakura Empire ships, for example. Now, we've already mentioned how close the stats are to Helena, but there are some differences, and those mostly are her luck, hit, and anti-sub warfare stat. I know some of you are going to be like, that there's another major difference between the two of them, to which I'm just going to respond with,
we have so many degenerates here. Incredible, you know?
Lastly, let's cover gun efficiencies. St. Louis's main gun is a CL gun that has a 135% efficiency. This efficiency is above average, so combined with her good firepower stat, she'll do quite well in the damage department. As for her secondary DD gun, the efficiency sits at about average efficiency of 65%. Some ships do beat her, but the difference isn't really that major. As for her anti-air guns, they sit at 100%, which is well below several other Eagle elite cruisers. From what I've noticed with her and Helena, anti-air isn't their specialty, but of course we can rely on someone else for that. Overall, her stat line isn't bad, and when we look at her stats at level 120, we can see a seemingly balanced distribution of those boosts. I can definitely appreciate the health, evasion, and firepower bumps, so she's worth spending those resources on to get there. However, there may be some concerns. I've had issues with keeping Helena alive before, so I can't imagine St. Louis being much different. However, Helena is still a really good character because of her skill, especially against bosses. So let's see if St. Louis ends up in a similar situation. St. Louis's first skill is...
ラッキールー
yeah, that. Anyway, this skill has up to a 60% chance every 20 seconds to increase her firepower, reload, and evasion by up to 30% for 8 seconds. These boosts to her stats are rather nice. It definitely does help her DPS game, as you can see her get some serious damage out thanks to the rate of fire and damage boost. The evasion boost does help keep her alive a bit more, so that definitely helps as well. However, this skill is still RNG based, so it's possible you might never see it proc at all. You can hope your RNG works in your favor, but is this really where you want to spend your RNG at this time? Her second skill is anti-air mode, which increases anti-air at the cost of firepower. Now this skill is not new to our reviews, but for those that aren't familiar with this particular skill, it starts out with a nasty 40% firepower trait for only a 20% anti-air boost. However, after the skill is maxed out, it costs only 20% firepower for a 40% anti-air boost. This is definitely a skill you want to level ASAP if you plan to use any character that has this particular skill. It's going to reduce their overall DPS, but when leveled, at least it's not as bad as it could be. Do keep in mind that there is only a 25% chance for this skill to proc when she fires her anti-air guns, so again, there is a chance that it may never happen in a fight at all. So much like Helena, St. Louis has some RNG to her overall playstyle, but the skills can have a decent impact in certain scenarios overall. But now comes the real question. Boss or Mob Fleet Vanguard? I feel that St. Louis is much better in a mob environment, but of course I can see her in both. Unlike Helena, St. Louis doesn't have a skill that promotes heavy DPS against a boss, as her skills are, well, more for herself. The overall DPS boost from her Lucky Lose skill will aid in mob fleet fights, and I guess can help out in boss fights as well, but nothing compared to her sister. One should be careful if the boss is of a carrier type, as the downside of anti-air mode might come into play against her. Another concern of a boss fight is her health pool. As I've mentioned before, I've had a hard time keeping Helena alive in a boss fight despite how useful she can be. The lack of healing, plus the high damage output that the bosses can dish out, does pose a decent threat to her. So one might want to consider that if things aren't working out well. Now she does get a short boost to her evasion, which that can definitely help out, but again, that's if luck decides to work in your favor here. One last thing to note is that St. Louis is a lone wolf character, since her skills don't affect her team. As such, she has no direct synergy with anyone, but this also means that she has no conflictions and can work with pretty much anyone. Of course, you could keep her with her sister, or if you would prefer, I guess you could stick her with Honolulu and keep that shipping of 2 ships shipping, if that makes sense. Just remember you may need a Lenny face or two. Overall though, St. Louis is a ship that really plays off of her luck. Her skills are RNG, but can come in handy if they proc. Of course, the real thing is seeing if your luck will make that happen. She may not be the best pick for bosses, but she can definitely pull her own weight in mobs. Now, of course, the major question for a lot of you at this point is she a top tier waifu? Well, okay, I guess if you're into the teasing Onesan character, then I think she might be right up your alley. Although I do worry that Atago will be quite upset at that point. I mean, my Atago is still...
もうダメ
Ah, God, where's the spray bottle? And that'll be all for St. Louis. Hope you all enjoyed and that this will help you in your future sorties. As usual, the list is shown on screen. The list is truncated, but if you're looking for the full list of characters that I have on my review list, then feel free to check out the link in the description. If there's a character not on the list that I have not covered, then feel free to let me know in the comments below. Up next is everyone's favorite little ghost boat. So look forward to her video when it comes out. Now, whether you're a regular viewer or a patron supporting the channel on Patreon, thanks for watching and I'll see you guys all again real soon.